She said she couldn't stand him. He swore she drove him crazy. But he knew by heart how she took her coffee, and she kept a whole drawer full of pens just because he was always losing his. If anyone badmouthed her, he turned into a hurricane. If anyone criticized him, she lost her composure in a way that scared even herself. And in the hallway, every time they said goodbye, the kiss on the cheek never quite landed on the cheek. This is the story of two people who fooled everyone, except everyone. The coffee was wrong again. Ella Green noticed it the second the cup hit the counter. Too much milk. A pale, sad excuse for coffee that Noah Williams would take one sip of, set down with that annoyed exhale he did, and then spend the next 10 minutes pretending it didn't bother him while it clearly, absolutely without question, bothered him. She caught the barista's eye before the cup even made it to the pickup window. That one needs to be redone. 1 drop of milk. 1. Like you're afraid of the milk. The barista blinked. Are you ordering for Dr. Williams again? I'm not ordering for anyone. I'm correcting a mistake. She grabbed her own latte and walked out of the hospital cafeteria before the girl could say anything else. The last thing she needed was another person on the 5th floor smirking at her like they knew something she didn't. They didn't know anything. There was nothing to know. Ella had been a pediatrician at Green Memorial for 4 years. Her father, Richard Green, had built this hospital from a bankrupt clinic 30 years ago. She'd earned her place here, top of her class, published research, a reputation for diagnosing what other doctors missed in children. The fact that her last name was on the building was a coincidence she'd stopped apologizing for around year 2. Noah Williams had arrived 3 years ago, cardiothoracic surgeon, recruited from Chicago with a resume that made the board fall over themselves, talented hands, sharp mind, and a mouth that never stopped running. She couldn't stand him. That was the story, and she was sticking to it. Their offices sat on opposite ends of the 5th floor, separated by a corridor lined with nurses' stations and supply closets. Every morning the same choreography played out. She'd walk in at 7:15. He'd already be there, leaning against the nurses' station with his white coat thrown over one shoulder, like some ridiculous movie poster, chatting with whoever would listen. "Morning, Green," he'd say, not even looking up. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. Williams. And that would be that. Except it was never that. "Though you look like you slept in your car," he said that particular Tuesday, finally glancing at her. His eyes moved across her face with a speed that looked casual. It wasn't. "And you look like you styled your hair with a fork, but I wasn't going to mention it." He grinned. That crooked, infuriating grin that made the nurses giggle and made Ella want to throw her coffee at the wall. "Touchy this morning. Rough night." "Delightful night, actually. I dreamed you transferred to another hospital. Heartbreaking." He pressed a hand to his chest. "I'll add it to my collection of your daily affirmations." She turned on her heel and headed toward her office. He watched her go. The smile stayed, but something behind it shifted, something quick, something he packed away before anyone could catch it. Linda, the head nurse, did catch it. "You two are exhausting," she muttered, not looking up from her clipboard. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." Later that morning, Ella found 3 pens missing from her desk. She sighed, opened her second drawer, the one she kept stocked specifically for this, and waited. 11 minutes. That's how long it took. A knock. The door opened without an invitation. "Got a pen?" Noah asked, already halfway inside. She held one up without a word. He took it, and his fingers brushed hers. A brief warmth. The smell of his soap, cedar maybe or something darker, reached her for just a second. "You're a lifesaver, Green. And you're a disaster. How does a surgeon lose 3 pens before 10 a.m.? Talent." He winked and left. She stared at the door for exactly 4 seconds longer than necessary. Then she opened her laptop and got to work. At lunch, they ended up at the same table. This was not unusual. This was not planned. This was simply what happened when 2 people who could barely tolerate each other somehow always gravitated to the same corner of the cafeteria. He reached across and picked up her sandwich. Without a word, he tore the crusts off, set them on his own plate, and handed it back. His fingers worked with the precision of a surgeon, and the ease of a habit so old it had become invisible. She took the sandwich and bit into it. Thanks. For what? Nothing. Across the table, a resident named Marco watched this exchange with wide eyes. He opened his mouth to comment. Linda, passing by with a tray, shook her head slowly. Marco closed his mouth. When lunch ended and they stood in the corridor, her turning left toward pediatrics, him turning right toward the surgical wing, they paused. It was automatic, muscle memory. He leaned in. She tilted her cheek. The kiss landed where it always did. Not quite the cheek, not quite the mouth. That dangerous, ambiguous territory in between, where lips grazed skin that was almost lips. It lasted 1 second too long, maybe 2. "See you at the staff meeting," she said, already walking away. "Wouldn't miss it." Neither of them looked back, but if they had, they would have seen Linda and Marco exchanging a look that said everything neither doctor was willing to say. 3 things were certain at Green Memorial Hospital. The elevator on the east wing would always smell like disinfectant and exhaust. The vending machine on the 3rd floor would eat your dollar and give you nothing. And if you valued your career, you never, under any circumstances, spoke poorly of Dr. Ella Green in front of Dr. Noah Williams. Sandra Mitchell, a second-year nurse on the surgical floor, had not received this memo. It was a Thursday. Noah was reviewing post-op charts at the nurse's station, half listening to the chatter around him. Sandra stood 2 feet away, complaining to a colleague about the pediatrics department's latest scheduling request. "She's so annoying," Sandra said, flipping through a file with exaggerated frustration. "Dr. Green acts like the whole hospital revolves around her schedule. Must be nice when Daddy owns the place." The air changed. Noah set down his pen. The click against the counter was small, but the silence that followed was enormous. Every nurse within earshot went still. Linda, 3 chairs down, slowly removed her glasses and placed them on the desk, the way someone might remove jewelry before a fight. "What did you say?" Noah's voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. Sandra looked up, surprised. I mean, the scheduling has been—" "No. Repeat exactly what you said, word for word." Sandra's colleague took a quiet step backward. "Smart woman. I was just venting. Everyone does it." Noah stood. He was tall, and when he straightened to his full height with that particular expression, jaw tight, eyes cold, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Dr. Green is a board-certified pediatrician who has published more research in 3 years than most physicians manage in a decade. She doesn't control scheduling, the department head does, and if your frustration with hospital logistics leads you to insult colleagues behind their backs during working hours, that's not venting. He paused. "That's a conduct issue." Sandra's face drained of color. "Dr. Williams, I didn't mean—" "I'll be filing a report with Human Resources this afternoon. You might want to prepare a statement." He picked up his charts and walked away. His hands were steady. His pulse was not. Linda watched him go and let out a long, slow breath. She looked at Sandra, who stood frozen with her mouth open, and shook her head. "Honey," Linda said, "I would have warned you, but you didn't ask." By the time Noah reached his office, the anger had settled into something heavier. He sat at his desk and pressed his palms flat against the surface. He didn't understand the intensity of his own reaction. Sandra was annoying, sure, but plenty of people said careless things in hospitals. Gossip was oxygen in a building like this, but the image of someone calling Ella annoying, reducing her to something small and dismissible, made his jaw tight with anger. He filed the report. He didn't hesitate. He also didn't tell Ella. The following week, the universe balanced the scales. Ella was refilling her water bottle in the break room when she overheard Dr. James Whitfield, an orthopedic surgeon with an ego the size of the parking garage, holding court at the coffee machine. "Williams thinks he's God's gift to surgery," Whitfield was saying, stirring his coffee with a self-satisfied smirk. "Walks around like he's hilarious, always cracking jokes. It's a hospital, not a comedy club. Someone should tell him to grow up." Ella's hand stopped on the water dispenser. Something detonated inside her chest. She crossed the break room in 4 steps. Whitfield saw her coming, and his smirk wavered. Good instinct, bad timing. "Who do you think you are?" Her voice came out sharp enough to cut glass. Whitfield blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." "Who are you?" with your average surgical record and your terrible attitude, to say a single word about Noah Williams." The break room went silent. A resident holding a yogurt slowly lowered his spoon. "Dr. Green, I was just what? Just running your mouth about the best surgeon in this hospital because you can't handle that he's better at his job and people actually enjoy being around him." Whitfield took a step back. "I think you're overreacting." Wrong word. "Overreacting?" She moved closer. Her hands were trembling. She could feel the heat climbing up her neck, flushing her cheeks. "You want to talk about someone's professionalism? Start with your own. I've read your complication rates. I wouldn't let you operate on a doll." A nurse in the corner covered her mouth. Whitfield raised both hands. "Okay, fine, I apologize, I shouldn't have said it." "No, you shouldn't have." She stood there, breathing hard, and watched him leave. The break room stayed silent for a full 5 seconds after the door closed. Then the resident with the yogurt whispered, "That was terrifying." Ella walked out on unsteady legs. By the time she reached her office, her hands were still shaking. She sat in her chair and pressed them flat against her thighs. What just happened? She'd practically threatened a colleague. Over what? Over someone calling Noah a joker. People teased Noah constantly. He invited it. He lived for it. So why had the sound of Whitfield's voice, dismissive, mocking, made her feel like something precious was being stepped on? She closed her eyes. Her phone buzzed. A text from Noah. "Heard you almost made Whitfield cry in the break room. Should I send flowers or a thank you card?" She stared at the screen, typed back, "I don't know what you're talking about." His reply came instantly. "Sure you don't. By the way, your phone's at 12%. Come charge it." She looked at the battery. 11%. She grabbed her phone, walked down the corridor, opened his office door without knocking, plugged in the charger he always kept ready, and left without a word. He watched the door close behind her, leaned back in his chair, pressed his fingers to his lips to hide something that was far more than a smile. His chest ached in a way no surgery could fix. Richard Green had not built a hospital from a bankrupt clinic by being oblivious. He'd read people his entire career, patients who said they were fine but weren't, board members who smiled while sharpening knives, doctors who needed rest but refused to admit it. Reading people was his greatest surgical instrument, and he'd never once needed a scalpel for it. So when it came to his daughter and Noah Williams, Richard didn't need clues. He had a front-row seat to the most obvious love story in the history of medicine, and the two leads were the only ones who hadn't read the script. It started, or rather, it continued, during the monthly department meeting. Richard sat at the head of the conference table, watching the two of them across the room. Ella was presenting the pediatric department's quarterly results. Noah sat 3 chairs away, arms crossed, leaning back with that expression he wore when he wanted to look bored, but was actually paying close attention. "The readmission rates dropped by 14%, Ella said, clicking to the next slide. "Largely because we adjusted the discharge protocol for respiratory cases," Noah finished, not even looking up from his phone. Ella paused, turned to him. "I was going to say that. I know. You were taking too long. I was building context. You were stalling." A ripple of suppressed laughter moved through the room. Richard pressed his lips together and studied the ceiling. After the meeting, the 3 of them ended up in the hallway together. Richard fell into step beside them, hands in the pockets of his grey coat. "That was a good presentation, sweetheart," he said to Ella. "Thanks, Dad." "Noah seemed to know every number before you said it." Ella's jaw tightened. Noah has a habit of inserting himself where he's not needed. Noah, walking on the other side of Ella, kept his eyes forward. "It's a small hospital. I read the memos." "You read pediatric memos?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "Since when does a cardiothoracic surgeon care about children's discharge protocols?" A beat of silence. Noah scratched the back of his neck. "I like to stay informed." "About my daughter's department specifically?" "About all departments." Richard hummed. The sound was patient and deeply unconvinced. They reached the elevator. Richard pressed the button and turned to face both of them. They stood side by side, shoulders almost touching, wearing identical expressions of defensive irritation, like 2 cats caught on the kitchen counter, scrambling for an excuse. "You know," Richard said, his voice light and warm, "your mother used to argue with me exactly like you two argue, every single day. drove the nursing staff crazy. Ella's eyes widened. "Dad, do not compare this to you and Mum. I'm just making an observation." "It's a terrible observation." Richard looked at Noah. "What do you think?" Noah's face was carefully blank. "I think Dr. Green and I have a professional relationship built on mutual respect." Ella turned to him. "Mutual respect? Yesterday you hid my stethoscope in the ceiling tile. That was a team-building exercise. I had to stand on a chair, and you handled it beautifully." Richard watched this exchange like a man watching tennis. Back and forth, back and forth. He noticed the way Noah's eyes softened at the edges when Ella got worked up. He noticed how Ella's voice, for all its sharpness, never actually carried real anger. It carried something else, something that buzzed and crackled like a live wire looking for a place to land. Later that evening, Richard found Ella in her office, finishing paperwork. He knocked twice and let himself in. Her desk was cluttered with patient files, a half-eaten granola bar, and a framed photo of the two of them at her medical school graduation. He sat in the chair across from her. She looked up and immediately narrowed her eyes. "Whatever you're about to say, don't. I haven't said anything. Your face is saying it. You have your matchmaker face on." Richard laughed, a warm, rounded laugh that filled the small office. "I don't have a matchmaker face." "You absolutely do. It's the same face you made when you tried to set me up with that dermatologist 2 years ago." "That was a mistake. The man had no sense of humor." He paused, folded his hands on his knee. "Noah has a sense of humor. Noah has a sense of harassment. He also knows you hate bread crusts. He knows your phone is always dying. He knows when your coffee order is wrong before you do." Richard tilted his head. "That's a lot of knowledge for someone who can barely tolerate you." Ella set her pen down. She stared at her father with a look that tried very hard to be annoyed and landed somewhere closer to cornered. "We work together, Dad. You learn things about co-workers. It's normal. I've worked with Margaret in accounting for 20 years. I don't know how she takes her coffee." "Maybe you should pay more attention to Margaret," Richard smiled. He recognized that defensive fire. He'd seen it in the mirror 40 years ago when his own father had asked why he kept finding excuses to visit the nurse on the 3rd floor, the one with the brown eyes and the stubborn streak, who eventually became Ella's mother. He stood up, walked to the door, stopped. "I'm not trying to push you, sweetheart. I just want you to be honest with yourself." His voice was gentle now, no teasing. "Because what I see between you two that's not irritation. That's two people who are terrified of how much they care." Ella opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You're wrong." Richard nodded slowly. "Okay." He left. Ella sat alone in the quiet of her office. The hallway sounds drifted in, a cart rolling past, a phone ringing somewhere, the distant murmur of the night shift arriving. She picked up her pen, set it down, picked it up again. Her father was wrong. Completely, entirely, absurdly wrong. She repeated this to herself 3 more times, trying to make it stick. But somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd repetition, her mind drifted to the way Noah had finished her sentence in the meeting, effortlessly like breathing, and her pen slipped from her fingers. She didn't pick it up. The suitcase was enormous. Noah spotted it before he spotted his mother, a faded floral monstrosity from the 90s, rolling through the arrivals gate with the confidence of a freight train. Behind it, pulling it with both hands and a determined expression, was Catherine Williams. She was small, 5'3" on a good day, with silver hair cut short and practical, and a smile that could warm a room before she even opened her mouth. She wore a lavender cardigan over a white blouse, sensible shoes, and a look of pure delight when she saw her son standing by the exit. "There's my boy." Noah crossed the distance in 3 steps and wrapped his arms around her. She smelled like home, vanilla, and that old hand lotion she'd used since he was a kid. He closed his eyes for a moment. He was 34 years old, a surgeon who held people's hearts in his hands, and his mother still made him feel like a 10-year-old eating cereal in pajamas. "You look thin," she said, pulling back to study his face. Her fingers reached up and pushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Are you eating?" "Mum, I'm a grown man." "That's not what I asked." He grabbed the suitcase, which weighed approximately the same as a small car, and guided her toward the parking lot. Catherine chatted the entire way, updating him on the neighborhood back in Ohio, on Mrs. Patterson's new dog, on the church fundraiser that had raised $1,200 for the community center. Noah listened and smiled. His mother had been alone for 8 years since his father passed. She'd never complained. She filled her days with friends, with volunteering, with gardening. But Noah saw the quiet moments when she thought no one was looking, the way she still set 2 coffee cups on the counter before catching herself, the way she touched his father's old watch when she was tired. He'd been asking her to visit for months. She finally agreed to stay for 2 weeks. "I want to see your hospital," she announced as they pulled onto the highway. "The place that keeps my son too busy to call his mother more than once a week. I call you 3 times a week. It should be daily." The next morning, Noah gave Catherine the full tour of Green Memorial. She was delighted by everything: the lobby fountain, the children's murals on the pediatric floor, the rooftop garden that staff used for lunch breaks. She shook hands with every person they passed, asked their names, remembered details. Linda, meeting her at the nurses' station, said she could see exactly where Noah got his charm. "Oh, he got nothing from me," Catherine said with a wave of her hand. "His father was the charming one. Noah just got my stubbornness." Noah shook his head. "That part's true." They were rounding the corner toward the cafeteria when they nearly collided with Richard Green. He was coming from the opposite direction, reading something on his tablet, and looked up just in time to avoid a collision. "Richard," Noah stepped aside. "This is my mother, Catherine Williams. Mom, this is Dr. Richard Green. He owns the hospital." Catherine extended her hand. "It's a beautiful building. You must be very proud." Richard took her hand, held it. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Catherine had the kind of warmth that didn't ask permission. It simply arrived. "Thank you, Mrs. Williams. And please call me Richard. Only if you call me Catherine." They stood there for a moment. Noah noticed with a surgeon's eye for detail that his mother's cheeks had flushed the faintest shade of pink, and that Richard Green, who Noah had never seen flustered in 3 years, was still holding her hand. He cleared his throat. They let go. "Would you like to join us for coffee?" Richard asked. "The cafeteria here is nothing special, but there's a bakery 2 blocks away that does wonderful scones." Catherine's eyes lit up. "I haven't had a proper scone in years." Noah looked between them. "I have a surgery in 20 minutes. "That's fine, dear." Catherine was already adjusting her cardigan and smoothing her hair. "Richard will keep me company. Won't you, Richard?" Richard smiled, a smile Noah had never seen on the man before. Younger somehow, like someone had wound back a clock. "It would be my pleasure." They left together. Noah stood in the corridor, watching his mother walk away with the owner of his hospital, and felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't discomfort. It was more like watching 2 puzzle pieces drift toward each other and realizing they might actually fit. He shook it off and headed to surgery. The scone run lasted 2 hours. When Catherine finally returned to Noah's office, she was carrying a paper bag and wearing the kind of expression that women wear when something has shifted inside them. Quietly, permanently. "He lost his wife 12 years ago," Catherine said, settling into Noah's chair as if it were hers. "Cancer. He raised Ella alone after that. Did you know?" "I knew. He still wears his wedding ring on a chain around his neck." Noah looked at his mother. Her voice had changed. It was softer now, threaded with something tender and private. "He's a good man, Mom. I can tell." She looked down at her hands. "He asked if I'd like to have dinner tomorrow. A proper dinner, not hospital cafeteria food." A pause. "What did you say?" Catherine looked up at him. Her eyes, the same hazel green as his, were bright and cautious at the same time, like a woman standing at the edge of something she hadn't expected to find. "I said yes." Noah sat on the edge of his desk. His mother hadn't been on a date in 8 years, hadn't shown interest in anyone since his father died. And now, in a single morning, Richard Green had made her blush and agree to dinner. He should have felt protective. He should have felt cautious. Instead, he felt something warm settle in his chest, like sunlight finding a room that had been dark for too long. "Good," he said. "Wear the blue earrings. Dad always said they brought out your eyes." Catherine pressed her hand to her mouth. Her eyes glistened. "You're not upset?" Noah leaned over and kissed the top of her head. "Dad would want you to be happy, Mum, and Richard Green is one of the best people I know." Catherine squeezed his hand and didn't let go for a long time. 2 floors down, Ella sat in her office completely unaware that her father had just asked someone to dinner for the first time in 12 years. She was reviewing patient charts, chewing the end of a pen that she'd stolen back from Noah that morning, and trying very hard not to think about what her father had said the night before. 2 people terrified of how much they care. She bit the pen harder and turned the page. They're holding hands. Ella said it like someone reporting a medical emergency. She stood at the window of Noah's office, arms crossed, watching her father and Catherine Williams walk through the hospital courtyard below. Their fingers were intertwined. Richard was laughing at something Catherine had said, and Catherine was leaning into his shoulder with an ease that suggested they'd been doing this for decades, not 2 weeks. Noah looked up from his desk. "Yeah, they do that now." "Since when?" "Since about Tuesday." Ella pressed her forehead against the glass. The coolness helped, slightly. It wasn't that she disapproved. Her father deserved happiness. After 12 years of widowhood, 12 years of putting every ounce of love into his daughter and his hospital, Richard Green had earned the right to hold someone's hand in a courtyard. Catherine was wonderful. Genuinely, undeniably wonderful. Warm, funny, and kind in a way that didn't feel performed. The problem wasn't Catherine. The problem was that Catherine came attached to Noah Williams, and if their parents were together, that meant family dinners, shared holidays, weekend brunches. It meant Noah in her living room, Noah at her father's table, Noah everywhere she turned with no hospital walls to contain him. "Your mother wants to have dinner at my dad's house on Friday," Ella said, still facing the window. "I know, she told me this morning, twice. Are you going?" "Do I have a choice?" Ella turned around. You could say no. Noah leaned back in his chair and studied her. His eyes moved over her face, the tight jaw, the crease between her eyebrows, the way she was gripping her own elbows like she was holding herself together. "Could you?" he asked. She didn't answer. They both knew. Friday arrived like a verdict. Ella spent 45 minutes deciding what to wear, which annoyed her deeply because she never spent 45 minutes on anything that wasn't a diagnosis. She settled on jeans and a dark green sweater that she told herself she chose because it was comfortable. Not because Noah had once said in passing that green suited her. She barely remembered that comment. It meant nothing. She arrived at her father's house to find Catherine already in the kitchen, wearing Richard's apron and stirring something that smelled like rosemary and butter. The kitchen was warm and golden, and Catherine moved through it like she belonged there. "Ella, sweetheart." Catherine wiped her hands and pulled Ella into a hug. She smelled like fresh bread and that vanilla lotion. "I made chicken. Your father told me it's your favorite." "You didn't have to do that, Catherine." "Nonsense. Cooking for people I love is my favorite thing in the world." She paused, then touched Ella's cheek. "That color looks beautiful on you, by the way." Ella blinked. The compliment landed somewhere unprotected. She wasn't used to a woman's tenderness. She'd grown up surrounded by her father's steady, quiet love, reliable as gravity, but masculine in its restraint. Catherine's warmth was different, softer, the kind that wrapped around you without asking permission. "Thank you," Ella said, and meant it. Noah arrived 20 minutes late, which Ella noted with her usual precision. He walked in carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a grey sweater with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. His forearms were tanned, and there was a watch on his left wrist that she'd never seen before. She noticed the watch. She did not notice the forearms. "Sorry I'm late. Surgery ran long." "Shocking," Ella said from the couch. "The great Noah Williams, saving lives and making everyone wait." He sat down next to her, not across from her, next to her, close enough that his knee brushed hers when he leaned forward to set the wine on the coffee table. "Miss me, Green?" "Like a headache misses aspirin." Richard and Catherine exchanged a look from the kitchen. Catherine bit her lip to keep from laughing. Richard shook his head with the patience of a man who had seen this show many, many times. Dinner was beautiful. Catherine had made roasted chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes, and a salad with pears and walnuts. They sat around the dining table, And something about the candlelight and the food and Catherine's laughter made the room feel like a place where people had been gathering for years, not weeks. Richard told stories about building the hospital. Catherine talked about teaching elementary school in Ohio for 30 years. Noah described his worst day as a resident, a surgery that lasted 11 hours and ended with him falling asleep in a supply closet. Ella laughed so hard at that image that she snorted, which made Noah laugh, which made her laugh harder, which made everyone laugh until the table shook. For a few minutes, the armor came down. Then Noah reached for the breadbasket at the same time Ella did. Their hands collided. His fingers closed around hers, just for a second, warm and solid. She pulled back fast. He pulled back faster. "Sorry," he said. "Fine," she said. The word came out breathless. She busied herself buttering a roll she didn't want. Under the table, his hand was in a fist on his thigh. His knuckles were white. After dinner, they ended up washing dishes together, while Richard and Catherine sat on the porch with tea. The kitchen was quiet except for running water and the clink of plates. Noah washed, Ella dried. A system that assembled itself without discussion, as if their hands had negotiated it in some silent language their mouths refused to speak. He handed her a wet plate. Their fingers touched again. This time neither pulled away immediately. The contact lasted 2 seconds. 3. "You have soap on your nose," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Where?" She reached up and wiped it off with her thumb. The pad of her finger dragged across the bridge of his nose, and for one unguarded moment, his eyes closed. Just a flicker. There and gone. She turned back to the drying rack. Her heart was beating in her throat. They finished the dishes in silence. When Richard drove Catherine back to Noah's apartment, Ella stood in the doorway and watched the car pull away. Noah was in the passenger seat. He didn't look back. She closed the door, leaned against it, and pressed both hands to her cheeks. They were burning. The group text arrived on a Wednesday, and it changed everything. Catherine had sent it, a photo of a beachside hotel in Cape May, New Jersey, with a message that read, 4 days, 4 people, ocean views. Richard and I already booked. You two are coming, not a question. Ella stared at her phone in the break room, scrolled up, scrolled down, read it again. 4 days with Noah in a hotel at the beach. She called her father immediately. "Dad, no. It's already booked, sweetheart." "Then unbook it. Catherine is so excited. She's been planning the restaurants we'll try. She even bought a new sun hat." Richard's voice had that gentle, immovable quality, like a boulder wrapped in velvet. "It would break her heart if you didn't come." Low blow. He knew it. She knew he knew it. This is manipulative. This is a family vacation. He's not my family. A pause. Richard's silence carried more weight than most people's speeches. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. He could be, if you'd let him. She hung up. 3 floors up, Noah was having an almost identical conversation with his mother by phone. 4 days, Mum. I have patients. Dr. Chen can cover. I already asked. You called my colleague. Richard gave me the number. He's a lovely man, very accommodating. Noah pinched the bridge of his nose. This is a setup. This is a vacation. You work too hard. Ella works too hard. Fresh air and ocean waves will do you both good. You realize she and I can barely survive a dinner together without starting a massive argument. Catherine laughed. That knowing musical laugh that told Noah she saw right through him and had no intention of pretending otherwise. That's exactly why you need 4 days. He wanted to say no. The word was right there, fully formed, ready to launch. But then he thought about Ella at the beach, the wind in her hair, the salt on her skin, that sharp tongue softened by sunlight, and the no dissolved like sugar in hot water. Fine. Wonderful. Pack sunscreen. You burn like a lobster. They drove down on a Saturday morning, Richard and Catherine in the front of Richard's SUV, Ella and Noah in the back like reluctant teenagers being dragged to a family reunion. The car smelled like Catherine's lavender hand cream and the coffee Richard had picked up at a drive-thru. Noah sat behind the driver's seat. Ella sat behind Catherine. The middle seat between them was a demilitarized zone occupied by a cooler, 2 tote bags, and an invisible wall of stubbornness. For the first hour, they didn't speak to each other. Catherine and Richard carried the conversation, talking about the hotel, the weather forecast, a documentary they'd watched together. Their ease was almost painful to witness. Two people who had found each other late in life and weren't wasting a single moment being afraid of it. Somewhere around the second hour, Ella fell asleep. Her head drifted sideways, past the cooler, and landed on Noah's shoulder. He went rigid, every muscle locked. He looked down at the crown of her head, at the loose strands of hair that brushed his jaw, and felt something crack open inside his chest, something he'd spent years sealing shut. She smelled like peaches. Not perfume. Shampoo, maybe. Something ordinary and devastating. He didn't move, didn't breathe too deeply, just sat there, with her weight against him, and let the feeling wash over him like a tide he couldn't outrun. In the rearview mirror, Richard caught his eye. The older man's gaze was steady and warm. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just looked at Noah the way a father looks at someone he's beginning to trust with the most important thing in his world. Noah held that gaze, and for the first time he didn't look away. Ella woke up 10 minutes before they arrived. She lifted her head, blinked, and realized where she'd been resting. A flush climbed her neck like a sunrise. Sorry. The road was bumpy. The road was perfectly smooth. Shut up, Williams, he smiled, not the crooked, teasing smile. A different one, smaller, private. The kind that lived in the corner of his mouth and went no further. She looked out the window and said nothing. The hotel was beautiful. White wood, green shutters, a wraparound porch that overlooked the ocean. They checked in at the front desk, where a cheerful woman in a floral blouse handed Richard 2 key cards. Suite 412, she said. 2 bedrooms, shared living area, ocean view. It's our best suite. Ella froze. 2 bedrooms? Yes, Mum. Connected by a lovely sitting room. Ella turned to her father. Where's your room? Richard held up his own key card. 3rd floor. Catherine and I have a separate room. So Noah and I are sharing a suite. Sharing a suite with separate bedrooms, Catherine clarified, as if the distinction made it perfectly reasonable. You each have your own space. The living room is just for, living. Noah looked at Ella. Ella looked at Noah. Can we get a different room? Ella asked the receptionist, her voice carefully polite and slightly strained. The woman checked her screen, clicked a few keys, shook her head with practiced regret. I'm sorry, we're completely full this weekend. There's a festival in town. Noah watched his mother's face, not a flicker of surprise, not a single twitch. Catherine Williams was examining a brochure about local lighthouses with the calm of someone who had absolutely nothing to do with this arrangement. He looked at Richard. Same expression, serene, innocent, impenetrable. They were good. He had to give them that. It's fine, Noah said. He picked up both suitcases, his and Ella's, and headed for the elevator. It's 4 days, we're adults, we can handle a shared living room. Ella followed him into the elevator. The doors closed. They stood side by side, watching the numbers climb. They planned this, she said. Obviously. I'm going to have a conversation with my father. Good luck. The man built a hospital from nothing. You think you can out-strategize him? She looked at him. He looked at her. The elevator hummed between floors. If you snore, she said, I will kick you straight into the ocean. If you hog the bathroom, he replied, I will break down the door. Try it and lose a hand. Noted. The doors opened. They walked to suite 412, and Noah swiped the key card. The door swung open to reveal a bright, airy space, a sitting room with a large window facing the ocean, a cream-colored couch, 2 armchairs, and a small dining table. On either side, 2 bedroom doors stood open, revealing matching beds with white linens. The ocean murmured through the window. Late afternoon light poured across the floor in warm gold stripes. It was beautiful. It was intimate. It was a trap, lined with throw pillows and sea breeze. Ella grabbed her suitcase, marched to the left bedroom, and closed the door firmly behind her. Noah stood in the living room alone. He set his bag down, walked to the window, and looked at the ocean. 4 days. He ran a hand through his hair, took a breath, and smiled. Slow, dangerous, and full of a feeling he was done pretending didn't exist. This was going to be interesting. Steam curled under the bathroom door like a slow, lazy cat stretching across the tile. Ella stood on the other side, towel wrapped tight, hair dripping, toothbrush frozen mid-stroke, staring at the door handle with the focused intensity of a woman who had just heard it rattle. It rattled again. 3 sharp knocks followed. "Green, you've been in there for 40 minutes. I'm starting to think you drowned." She spat toothpaste into the sink. "Go away, Williams. I need to brush my teeth. Use the kitchen sink." "There is no kitchen sink. It's a hotel suite, not an apartment." "Then use a water bottle. Be creative." A beat of silence. Then his voice again, lower, amused, dripping with the kind of patience that wasn't patient at all. "I'm counting to 10. Then I'm coming in. You come through that door and I will throw your suitcase right out the window." She heard him laugh, not a chuckle, a real, full laugh, the kind that came from the belly and traveled through walls. She hated that laugh. She hated that it made something warm and reckless flutter behind her ribs. 10, he said. 9, 8. She yanked the door open. He stood there, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, wearing nothing but a towel slung low around his hips. His hair was damp, pushed back from his forehead. Water droplets sat on his shoulders and traced paths down his chest that her eyes absolutely, categorically refused to follow. She followed them anyway, just for a second. "Bathroom's yours," she said, pushing past him. Her shoulder brushed his bare arm, and the contact sent a jolt through her that she disguised with an aggressive hair flip. "Thank you. Was that so hard?" Unbearable. She escaped to her bedroom and closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, pressed her palms against her cheeks. This was day 2. She had 2 more days of this. Noah, for his part, was enjoying himself far more than he should have been. He knew exactly what he was doing. The towel, the shirtless wandering, the deliberate invasions of her space. It was a game, and he played it with the precision of a surgeon and the conscience of a man who'd stopped pretending he didn't want a reaction. He wanted her flustered. He wanted to see the crack in her armor, the flash of something behind the irritation, because he'd seen it, twice now, in the kitchen at her father's house when she'd wiped soap off his nose, in the car when she'd woken up on his shoulder, tiny fractures in the wall she kept between them, and each one gave him a glimpse of something so honest it made his chest hurt. But he wasn't ready to name it, not yet. So he did what Noah Williams did best. He provoked. That afternoon, the 4 of them went to the beach. Catherine and Richard settled under an umbrella with books and iced tea, looking so content they could have been painted. Ella spread her towel a careful distance from Noah's and lay face down, determined to ignore him. He lasted 11 minutes. "You missed a spot," he said, standing over her and blocking her sun. She didn't open her eyes. "What?" "Sunscreen. Your back. Right shoulder blade." "I'll burn. It's fine. You'll peel. It's disgusting." "Then don't look." He crouched down. She felt the shift in the air before she felt him, the warmth of his body close to hers, the displacement of the breeze, the faint scent of coconut sunscreen mixed with his skin. His thumb pressed a cold dollop of sunscreen onto her right shoulder blade. She flinched. "Hold still. I didn't ask you to." "You never ask. I do it anyway." His hand spread the sunscreen across her shoulder, down along the edge of her spine. His fingers were careful and thorough, the hands of a surgeon, precise even in something this small. But there was nothing clinical about the way his palm lingered at the curve of her lower back, or the way his thumb traced a slow circle there before pulling away. She didn't breathe for the entire time. He stood up, wiped his hands on his shorts, and returned to his towel as if nothing had happened. She rolled onto her side, facing away from him, and closed her eyes. Her skin burned where his hand had been, not from the sun. Catherine watched from under the umbrella, a novel open on her lap that she had not turned a page of in 20 minutes. She looked at Richard. He looked back. They shared a smile so small and knowing that it needed no words. That evening, after dinner at a seafood restaurant where Noah stole a shrimp off Ella's plate and she retaliated by eating his last piece of bread, they returned to the suite. Richard and Catherine said good night at the 3rd floor, leaving the 2 of them to ride the elevator in loaded silence. Back in the suite, Ella kicked off her sandals and headed for the bathroom. Noah dropped onto the couch, stretching his legs across the cushions, and scrolled through his phone. She emerged 15 minutes later in pajamas, soft cotton shorts and a tank top with tiny flowers on it, her face scrubbed clean, her hair in a loose braid. She looked younger, like this. Softer. The sharpness that she wore like office armor had been packed away with her work clothes, and what remained was something raw and unguarded. Noah looked up from his phone. His scrolling stopped. She walked to the kitchen area to get water. The quiet light of the room caught the calm expression on her face, a rare soft moment that felt completely genuine. He watched her reach for a glass on the top shelf, her presence filling the silent space between them in a way he hadn't expected. He looked away, looked back, couldn't help it. "Take a picture," she said without turning around. "It'll last longer." Wasn't looking. "Your phone's been on the same screen for 2 minutes." He glanced down. She was right. He tossed the phone aside with a casualness that fooled neither of them. She sat in the armchair across from him, legs tucked beneath her, and sipped her water. The ocean hummed outside the window. The room was dim, lit only by the glow from the hallway and the faint silver of the moon through the curtains. They sat like that for a while, not speaking, not fighting, just existing in the same quiet space, which was somehow more terrifying than any argument they'd ever had. "This is weird," she said finally. "What is?" "Not fighting with you." He tilted his head, considered her. "We could fight if you want. I'll say something obnoxious. You call me an idiot. We go back to normal." "What's normal?" The question came out smaller than she intended. She hadn't meant to sound vulnerable, but the night and the ocean and the soft light had loosened something inside her, and the word slipped through before she could catch it. Noah didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked, and for once the teasing drained from his face entirely. What was left was something still and serious, and a little bit afraid. "I don't know anymore," he said. The honesty of it sat between them like a held breath. She set down her water, stood up, walked to her bedroom door. "Good night, Noah." It was the first time she'd used his first name outside the hospital. They both noticed. Neither mentioned it. "Good night, Ella." She closed the door softly. On the other side, she leaned against it and pressed her hand flat against her sternum, where her heart was doing something it had no business doing. In the living room, Noah stared at the ceiling. The ghost of her voice saying his name played on repeat in his head, and he knew, with the certainty of a diagnosis he didn't want to make, that he was in serious, devastating, irreversible trouble. Day 3 started with silence and ended with fire. The morning had been deceptively peaceful. They'd had breakfast with the parents, pancakes and fruit at a cafe near the boardwalk, Catherine telling stories about Noah as a boy that made Ella laugh until her coffee almost came out of her nose. Noah had endured the humiliation with unusual grace, occasionally glancing at Ella's laughter, like a man watching something he wanted to memorize. After breakfast, Richard and Catherine announced they were spending the afternoon at a vineyard. Just the two of them. Romantic. Noah and Ella exchanged a look that communicated an entire emergency broadcast in 2 seconds, but said nothing. They watched the car pull away and stood on the hotel steps like two soldiers abandoned behind enemy lines. They spent the day apart. Noah went for a run along the beach. Ella found a bookshop 3 blocks from the hotel and spent 2 hours reading in a corner armchair, drinking tea that tasted like someone's garden. When they reconvened at the suite in the late afternoon, something in the atmosphere had changed. The air felt tighter, charged, like a room before a thunderstorm when you can feel the electricity in the fillings of your teeth. Noah showered first, came out of his room in a casual t-shirt and sweatpants, toweling his hair, moving through the shared living room with the easy confidence of a man in his own apartment. Ella was on the couch, reading. She didn't look up. She refused to look up. He sat on the other end of the couch, tossed the towel over his shoulder. The scent of his soap reached her. Something warm, something dark, something that lodged itself behind her eyes like a word she couldn't remember. "Good book?" he asked. "Incredible. Best thing I've read in months. What's it about?" She paused. She had no idea. She'd been reading the same paragraph for 15 minutes. "It's complicated," she said. He smiled, that half smile, the one that said he knew something she hadn't admitted yet. "You seem tense," he said. "I'm not tense. Your jaw is clenched. That's my face. Your face looks angry. My face looks however it wants to look. Stop analyzing my face. He shifted closer. Not much. An inch? Maybe 2. But in the small geography of that couch, 2 inches was a continent. Can I ask you something? He said. She turned a page she hadn't read. No. Why do you get so defensive around me? I'm not defensive. I'm reactive. There's a difference. Reactive to what? She looked at him. That was her mistake. Because he was close now. Close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, the faint scar on his left eyebrow from a childhood accident she knew the story of, but would never admit she remembered. His face was open, stripped of its usual armor of sarcasm, and what she saw underneath made her stomach drop. He was looking at her the way she'd caught him looking at her a dozen times before. In the cafeteria, in the hallway, during meetings, when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Like she was a surgical problem he couldn't solve. Like she was the most fascinating and frustrating thing he'd ever encountered. You know what I think, he said, his voice dropping to something low and smooth. He leaned forward, his elbow rested on the back of the couch, his fingers dangerously close to her shoulder. I think you're terrified. Of what? That crooked, infuriating, devastating smile. Of the fact that you're completely, hopelessly, and painfully in love with me, and you've been hiding it behind every insult, every eye roll, and every time you call me Williams instead of Noah. Because if you call me Noah, it becomes real, and you'd rather fight me for the rest of your life than admit that you can't stop thinking about me. The words detonated. She saw red, not figuratively, literally. The edges of her vision blurred, and something white-hot tore through her chest. In a flash of fury, she threw the book straight at him, missing his shoulder by inches as he ducked. She stepped decisively into his space, completely done with his arrogance. You arrogant, delusional, self-obsessed... He stood up quickly to meet her, but the sudden momentum caught them both off balance, causing them to stumble backward onto the couch cushions, leaving them frozen in place. She tried to pull away, but the momentum carried them both down. He caught her hands gently but firmly, stopping the argument before it escalated any further, his position keeping them both static on the couch. She was furious, her heart racing from the sudden rush of adrenaline. Let me go. Not until we stop shouting. I'm not shouting. You just threw a book at me. And I'll do it again the second you let go. He didn't move, his gaze searching her face, completely breaking her defenses. Slowly, his expression hardened, and the sudden intensity in his stance made the argument die out right there. She went still. Their faces were inches apart. She could feel the heavy silence between them, the sudden stillness cutting off the air. He was completely focused on her. So was she on him. The air between them was paper-thin, and something in his eyes had shifted from teasing to something serious and undeniable. He leaned down. He stepped even closer, his gaze locked onto hers, his voice dropping to a rough, intense quiet that filled the space between them. Stop fighting me, he said, the words sharp and filled with the frustration he couldn't hide anymore. Stop fighting this, Ella. We both know we've passed the point of pretending. He held her eyes, demanding an honesty she wasn't ready to give. Tell me you don't feel it too. She caught her breath, unable to find a single word to push him away. Then her pride returned. It crashed back like a wave hitting a seawall, clear, sharp, and resolute. Breaking away from his hold with a sudden wave of determination, she moved out from under him and stood up, creating immediate distance between them. She stood tall, her voice shaking slightly but filled with an undeniable strength. You, she said, her eyes fixed on his, refusing to let him see how much he had shaken her composure. You don't get to decide what I feel. Not you. Never you. She turned on her heel, walked into her bedroom and slammed the door so hard that the painting above the couch rattled against the wall. The suite went silent. Noah lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling. His heart hammered against his ribs. The memory of her closeness was everywhere, in the quiet room in his lungs, leaving him completely unsettled. He dragged a hand down his face, laughed once. The sound was hollow and wrecked. He had pushed too far. He knew that. But the way she'd reacted to his closeness, not from anger, never truly from anger, from something else entirely, something that matched the emotional earthquake happening inside his own chest. He closed his eyes and let out a long, shattered breath. He was lost, completely irreversibly lost, and the worst part, the part that made him smile despite the chaos in his thoughts, was that she was too. She just wasn't ready to admit it yet. In the next room, Ella sat on the floor with her back against the door. Her knees were pulled to her chest, her forehead pressed against them. She could still feel his thumb on her lip, his breath on her ear, the weight of his body over hers. The sound of his voice, rough and low and devastating, asking her to say a word she would never say. Her hands were trembling, not from anger. She pressed them together hard, as if she could squeeze the feeling out through her palms. It didn't work. Neither of them mentioned it. Not at breakfast the next morning, where they sat across from each other and passed the sugar without eye contact. Not during the walk along the boardwalk with the parents, where they kept a careful 3-foot distance that fooled absolutely no one. Not during lunch, where Catherine tried twice to start a conversation that included both of them and was met with monosyllables and aggressive chewing. The morning after the couch should have been awkward. It was worse than that. It was electric. Every accidental glance carried the weight of what had almost happened. Every silence hummed with the memory of his whisper, her trembling, the slam of the door that still echoed between them like a bell that hadn't finished ringing. By late afternoon, Noah had had enough of the tension. He found Ella on the hotel balcony, actually reading this time, with her hair loose and her feet propped on the railing. "Some friends of mine live in town," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "They're throwing a party tonight. Rooftop bar, live music, good food." She turned a page. "I have fun. I want you to come." "Why would I do that?" "Because you've been hiding behind that book all day, and I know for a fact you finished it 2 hours ago. You've been rereading the last chapter." She closed the book, looked at him with narrowed eyes. He stood there, hands in his pockets, wearing that expression she could never fully decode. Part challenge, part invitation, part something deeper that he wrapped in casual body language so she wouldn't see it. "Fine," she said, "but if your friends are boring, I'm leaving." "My friends are fantastic." "That's concerning." He disappeared into his room with a grin. Ella sat on the balcony for another minute, heart tapping out a rhythm she didn't want to acknowledge. She showered. She dried her hair. She stood in front of the small closet and stared at her options with the focus of someone choosing the perfect armor. She'd packed light, mostly casual things, beach clothes, one dress. She pulled it out and held it against herself in the mirror. It was black, simple, sleeveless with a neckline that dipped just enough to suggest without revealing. The fabric hugged her waist and skimmed her hips before stopping above the knee. It was the kind of dress that didn't try too hard, which was exactly why it worked. She put it on, applied mascara, a touch of color on her lips, and small gold earrings that had been her mother's. She slipped on low heels, took one last look in the mirror, and opened the bedroom door. Noah was in the living room checking his phone. He wore a white linen shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, dark pants, shoes that said he'd made an effort without admitting it. He looked up when her door opened, and stopped. His phone lowered to his side. His lips parted. No sound came out. His eyes traveled from her face to her shoulders to the line of the dress against her body and back up again. And somewhere in that circuit, the composure he wore like a second skin simply vanished. She saw it happen, all of it. A slow, wicked smile spread across her face. "You look like a stray dog staring at food he can't have." He blinked, swallowed, recovered, barely. "I have no idea what you're talking about. You look adequate. Adequate. Acceptable. Passable. Fine. Your ears are red, Williams." He touched his ear, dropped his hand. "Let's go." She laughed. A real, full, delighted laugh that followed him out the door and into the elevator and all the way to the rooftop bar, where it finally softened into a smile she couldn't wipe off. The party was exactly what Noah had described, warm, lively, full of people who seemed genuinely happy to see him. The rooftop overlooked the ocean, strung with lights, and a band played jazz in the corner. His friends were a mix of college buddies and fellow surgeons, all loud, all welcoming, and all very interested in Ella. "This is Ella," Noah said, introducing her to a group near the bar. He didn't add a label, didn't say colleague, friend, acquaintance, just her name, like it was enough. His friend Marcus, tall, charming, easy smile, shook her hand and held it a beat too long. Noah didn't mention he was bringing someone this beautiful. That's because Noah has questionable judgment, Ella replied. Marcus laughed. Noah did not. Another friend, David, complimented her dress. A third asked where she worked, then spent 5 minutes telling her how impressive pediatric medicine was. They were kind, funny, and enthusiastic in a way that would have been flattering under any other circumstances. Noah watched it all with a jaw that could have cracked walnuts. He lasted exactly 12 minutes before his hand landed on the small of her back, warm, deliberate, unmistakable. "Dance with me," he said. Not a question. "I don't want to dance." "Scared?" She looked at him. The challenge in his eyes was familiar, the same spark that had started 100 arguments between them, but underneath it something new, something raw and barely contained. "Scared of what? Being bored to tears? Scared of what happens when I hold you?" The words landed like a match on dry grass. She held his gaze, set down her glass. "Lead the way." He took her hand and pulled her to the dance floor. The first song was fast, horns and drums, and a rhythm that demanded movement. They danced the way they did everything, with friction. He spun her. She rolled her eyes. He pulled her close. She pushed back. The dance floor became another battlefield, and they fought across it with hips and shoulders and smiles that neither could suppress. Then the song ended. The band shifted. A guitar began, soft, slow, deliberate. A melody that unfolded like a letter being opened. The kind of song that asks you to stop pretending. They both recognized it at the same time. She saw it in his face. He saw it in hers. The same flicker of surprise, the same unspoken thought. "You love this song too." Neither said it out loud. Noah didn't ask. He simply pulled her closer. One hand on the curve of her waist, the other finding hers and folding around it. She let him. Her free hand traveled up his arm, over his shoulder, and settled at the back of his neck. Her fingers brushed the short hair there, and she felt him shiver. A tiny tremor, gone in a second. They began to move. Slow, close, inevitable. His forehead came to rest against hers. Their eyes locked, and the rooftop and the lights, the people, the ocean, the band dissolved into background noise. The world shrank to the space between their bodies, which was no space at all. Noah looked at her. He studied her face the way he studied a scan before surgery, with total attention, searching for the detail that would change everything. The curve of her cheekbone, the slight unevenness of her bottom lip where she chewed it when she was nervous, the way her eyelashes cast tiny shadows on her skin in the string lights, the freckle below her left ear that he'd never noticed until this moment, that he now felt certain he'd never forget. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, not in the way of magazine covers or movie screens, in the way of a room you walk into and immediately feel like you've been looking for it your whole life. His hand slid from her waist up along her spine, slow and deliberate, until his fingers reached her hair. He lifted a strand, brought it to his nose, and breathed in. Peaches again. That ordinary, devastating scent that had haunted him since the car ride. He let the strand fall and his hand traveled back down, tracing the landscape of her back through the thin fabric, and he thought that nothing in his life, no diagnosis, no surgery, no achievement, had ever felt as significant as the softness of her body against his palms. Ella, meanwhile, was unraveling. She watched him from inches away and catalogued every detail she'd spent years pretending not to notice. The way his jaw tightened when he was concentrating. The depth of his eyes, green with those gold flecks that she'd memorized against her will. The broadness of his shoulders, which she only now realized made her feel impossibly safe. The way he held her, firm but careful, like she was something valuable, unbreakable and wanted. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure he could feel it through their chests. Butterflies. She hadn't felt butterflies since she was a teenager. But there they were, manic, chaotic, crashing into each other behind her ribs like they were trying to escape. He was looking at her like she was the only person on the rooftop, like everyone else had been erased, and she was all that remained. No one had ever looked at her like that. She didn't know it was possible to feel this seen and this terrified at the same time. She gave him a smile. Not the sharp one, not the sarcastic one. A real, soft, undefended smile that she had never meant to let him see. Something shifted in his face. His eyes widened just slightly, and then something crumbled behind them. A wall, a defense, a lie he'd been telling himself for 3 years. She watched it fall. She watched him realize what she'd already begun to suspect. The song ended. They stepped apart. The air between them rushed in, cold and unwelcome. Noah looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. His chest was tight. His mind was loud. The word he'd been running from for months, maybe years, sat on his tongue like a stone he couldn't swallow and couldn't spit out. Love. This was love, and it terrified him more than any surgery, any complication, any life or death moment in an operating room. Ella walked back to the bar on legs that didn't feel steady. She picked up a glass of water and drank half of it without tasting it. Her hands were shaking. She set the glass down and pressed her fingers against the counter. She knew. She'd known during the dance, maybe before. The feeling wasn't new. It was old, ancient, built layer by layer across 3 years of arguments and stolen glances and bread crusts removed without asking. She just hadn't let herself see it until his forehead pressed against hers and the whole world went quiet. She was in love with Noah Williams. The thought landed in her chest like a bird hitting a window. She was still standing there trying to breathe around the realization when a man appeared beside her, tall, confident, and completely unaware that he was walking into a minefield. "I don't think we've met," he said with an easy grin. "I'm Tyler, friend of Marcus." "Ella." She shook his hand automatically. Her voice was polite but distant, her mind still 3 songs behind, still on the dance floor, still pressed against Noah's chest. Tyler didn't notice. He leaned against the bar and asked her how she knew Noah, what she did, where she was from. Standard conversation. Harmless. 20 feet away, Noah watched, his jaw locked, his hands curled into fists at his sides. The jealousy didn't creep in. It exploded, fast and blinding, a flash fire that burned through every rational thought. He watched Tyler lean closer, watched him laugh at something Ella said, watched his eyes drop to the neckline of her dress, and something primal and possessive roared through Noah's body with a force that shocked him. He crossed the rooftop in 5 strides. His hand found Ella's, their fingers interlocked. She looked up at him, startled. "We're leaving," he said. Tyler blinked. "Oh, are you two—" "Yes." Noah didn't look at him. His eyes were on Ella, dark and intense, and barely controlled. "We are." He led her through the crowd, down the stairs and onto the sidewalk. The night air hit them, salt and jasmine, and the distant crash of waves. They walked in silence, hands still clasped. She could feel his pulse through his palm, fast and furious. She didn't pull away. Neither spoke. The streets were quiet, lit by old-fashioned lamps that threw warm circles on the cobblestone. Their footsteps fell into rhythm, his long, hers quick, and the silence between them was so heavy it had its own gravity. They reached the hotel, rode the elevator without a word, walked to the suite. He opened the door. Let her in first. The room was dark, the ocean visible through the window like a black silk sheet pulled to the horizon. "Good night," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Good night," he said. His wasn't much louder. They went to their separate rooms, closed their separate doors, and lay in their separate beds, staring at their separate ceilings with hearts beating the same frantic rhythm. Sleep didn't come for either of them. 2:14 a.m. Ella knew the exact time because she'd been watching the clock on the nightstand for over an hour, willing the numbers to blur into sleep. They didn't. Her body was tired. Her mind was a war zone. She rolled onto her side, then her back, then her stomach. The sheets twisted around her legs like soft restraints, and the pillow was either too flat or too thick, and the room was either too warm or too cold, and none of it was actually about the sheets or the pillow or the temperature. It was about him, on the other side of the wall, 12 feet and a lifetime of stubbornness away. She pressed her face into the mattress and groaned. This was ridiculous. She was a doctor. She delivered diagnoses that changed lives, held the hands of frightened parents, stayed calm in emergencies that would have broken anyone else. She was not the kind of woman who lost sleep over a man, except she was. Tonight, she absolutely was. She threw the covers off and sat up. Her feet found the cold floor. She stood, adjusted her pajama shorts, the cotton ones with the little cartoon animals printed on them, the ones she'd packed because they were comfortable and she hadn't expected anyone to see them, and opened her bedroom door. The living room was dark except for the moonlight streaming through the window. It painted the floor in pale silver, stretched across the furniture, and landed on the figure sitting on the couch. Noah. He sat facing the enormous window, one arm draped over the backrest, the other resting on his knee. No shirt, just grey sweatpants that hung low on his hips. His profile was sharp against the glow of the city below, jaw, cheekbone, the slope of his nose. He looked like he'd been sitting there for a while, like he'd given up on sleep long before she had. He turned his head when he heard her door, didn't speak, just looked at her with those eyes that had undone her on the dance floor, and waited. She crossed the room slowly. Her bare feet made no sound on the carpet. The air smelled like ocean and the faint trace of his soap, and she breathed it in without meaning to. She stopped between his legs. They were spread wide, relaxed, and she stood in the space between them as if it had been left open for her, as if he'd been waiting for her to fill it. His hands moved to her hips, slowly, giving her time to step back. She didn't. He pulled her down onto his thigh. She settled against him, her legs draped sideways, her shoulder tucked under his arm. He wrapped one arm around her waist, his thumb finding the bare skin between her shorts and her top. It moved in slow, lazy circles, drawing invisible patterns that her nerve endings memorized instantly. He looked at her pajamas, the little cartoon animals. A smile broke across his face, quiet, tender, nothing like his usual grin. "You look beautiful," he said. No punchline followed, no sarcasm, no deflection. She didn't deflect either. She just let the words land and felt them settle into a place that had been empty for a long time. They sat together and looked at the night. The city below glowed in soft oranges and whites, and beyond it, the ocean stretched into darkness. A car moved along a distant road, its headlights tracing a path and disappearing. Somewhere, a church bell marked the half-hour. The sound drifted through the window, faint and ancient. She exhaled, a long, slow breath that carried the tension of the entire trip out of her body and into the dark room. He looked at her. She looked at him. Time stopped doing its job. His hand left her waist and rose to her face. His fingers curved along her jaw, tilting her head toward him. His touch was careful, as if he understood that what was happening was fragile, a glass thing being held by hands that had only ever known how to grip. He kissed her forehead, long, slow. His eyes closed. His lips pressed against her skin and stayed there, and she felt the warmth of his breath spread across her temples, like a prayer being whispered into the wrong church. He pulled back, kissed her left eyelid, then the right, featherlight. The brush of his lips made her eyelashes flutter against his mouth, her nose the tip of it. A kiss so gentle it was barely a touch, her chin. His lips lingered there, and she felt his breath travel up across her mouth without landing. They were both trembling now, fine invisible tremors that lived in the space between skin and bone. He pulled back just far enough to look at her. His eyes dropped to her mouth. She watched him watching her lips, and the anticipation was so sharp it hurt. He leaned in, slowly. His teeth found her bottom lip. He bit down, gently, deliberately, and pulled. A slow, devastating drag that sent a sound out of her throat before she could stop it. A small, broken exhale. A surrender disguised as a breath. He held her lip between his teeth for a moment that lasted a century, then released it. Their eyes met. The last wall fell. He kissed her like a man who had been holding his breath for 3 years and had finally been allowed to breathe. Both hands buried in her hair, pulling her against him, his mouth meeting hers with a hunger that had nothing to do with patience and everything to do with a dam breaking. She tasted like toothpaste and something sweeter underneath. something that was just her, just Ella, and it hit his bloodstream like a jolt of electricity, leaving him completely breathless. She kissed him back. Not gently, not timidly. She kissed him the way she did everything, with fire, with intensity, with a ferocity that told him she'd been fighting this as hard as he had, and was just as exhausted from the war. Her hands gripped his shoulders. Her fingers dug into the muscle there, and the sharp pressure of her nails sent electricity down his spine. He groaned against her mouth, a low, rough sound that vibrated through both of them, and pulled her closer, tighter, until there was no air left between their bodies, and still it wasn't enough. They broke apart for a second, gasping, foreheads together, eyes open. Noah. His name in her mouth was a sound he wanted to hear every day for the rest of his life. He didn't answer with words. He kissed her again, deeper this time, slower, his tongue tracing the shape of her bottom lip before finding hers. His hands slid from her hair down her back, memorizing the curve of her spine, the dip of her waist, the warmth of her skin through the thin cotton of her pajamas. She made a sound against his mouth, quiet, desperate. It undid him. He stood, lifting her with him, one arm under her knees, the other around her back. She weighed nothing in his arms, and she wrapped hers around his neck and pressed her face into the hollow of his throat. He felt her lips move against his pulse, and his knees nearly buckled. He carried her to his room, kicked the door closed with his foot, laid her on the bed with a gentleness that contradicted the storm raging through his body. She looked up at him, hair spread across the pillow, eyes wide, chest rising and falling, and he stood there for a moment, just looking at her. She was trembling. So was he. He lowered himself beside her, propped on one elbow. His free hand cradled her face. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and he watched her eyes soften in a way he'd never seen before. The sharpness was gone. The armor, the wit, the defenses she wore like a surgeon's gloves. What remained was a woman who was scared and brave and open in a way that made his heart crack down the middle. "Are you sure?" he whispered. She took his hand from her face and pressed it flat against her chest, over her heart. He felt it, racing, pounding, alive with everything she hadn't been able to say. "I've never been more sure of anything." He kissed her again, gently now. A slow, reverent kiss that started at her mouth and traveled. Her jaw, the soft skin below her ear, the line of her neck where her pulse beat against his lips. She arched into him, and the sound she made was small and desperate and perfect. He took his time. He moved slowly. He kissed every inch of skin she offered as though each one was a gift he hadn't earned. His mouth found her collarbone, the hollow at the base of her throat, the space between her ribs, where her breath hitched. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, and the tenderness of a man who understood that this moment was sacred, that she was giving him something that required trust and vulnerability and courage, and he would honor every piece of it. She pulled him closer, closer, until there was nothing between them but heartbeats. He loved her with his whole body, strong and intense and consumed by her, but never rough, never careless. Every movement was deliberate. Every touch carried the weight of 3 years of wanting and the lightness of finally having. He watched her face. He caught every sound. When her eyes filled with tears, not from pain but from the sheer force of feeling something so deep it couldn't be contained, he kissed them away, each tear, one by one, his lips gentle on her wet cheeks, while their bodies moved together in a rhythm that felt older than both of them. Afterward, they lay tangled together, his body still pressed against hers, his forehead resting on her shoulder, his breathing slowly returning to normal. She ran her fingers through his hair, and the tenderness of that simple gesture almost broke him again. She spoke first. "What are we now?" He lifted his head, looked at her. Her eyes were bright, still glistening, and she was looking at him with a mixture of hope and fear that he wanted to spend the rest of his life turning into certainty. "I want to be yours," he said. "My heart already is. It's been yours for longer than I was willing to admit." The tears came again. She pressed her hand to her mouth, but they escaped anyway, sliding down her temples and into her hair, carrying with them years of resistance and walls, and the exhausting pretense that she didn't love this man with every stubborn, complicated, terrified piece of herself. "I love you," she said. The words came out broken and whole at the same time. I love you, and I think I've loved you since the first time you stole a pen from my desk and pretended you didn't." He laughed. The sound was wet and raw and full of joy. "Be my girlfriend," he said, "officially, right now, in these sheets with your ridiculous animal pajamas on the floor and my heart in your hands." "Yes." She pulled his face to hers and kissed him. "Yes." They stayed there, wrapped in each other, trading kisses and confessions that tumbled out freely now that the gates were open. Small things, when he first noticed her. The real reason he switched parking spots. The drawer full of pens she kept stocked for him. Every secret act of care, finally spoken aloud, finally given a name. He ran a bath. When the tub was full, steam rising in the dim bathroom, he lifted her again and carried her in. He set her down in the warm water and climbed in behind her. His hands moved over her skin with soap and devotion, her shoulders, her arms, the curve of her back. She turned and did the same, her fingers tracing the lines of his chest, his jaw, the scar on his left eyebrow. They washed each other in silence. No words needed, just hands and water and the sound of two people discovering that the space between war and love was thinner than either of them had ever imagined. He pulled her close. She leaned back against his chest, and his arms held her steady, held her close, held her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. They lost themselves in each other again. Slower this time, eyes open, hearts wide. The water grew cold around them. They didn't notice. Sunlight poured across the hotel bed like warm honey, and Ella woke up wrapped in Noah Williams. His arm was draped over her waist, his chest pressed against her back, rising and falling with the slow rhythm of deep sleep. His breath moved through her hair in soft, warm waves, and she lay still for a long moment, afraid that if she moved, she'd discover this had all been a dream her stubborn heart had invented. She shifted slightly. His arm tightened. "Don't," he murmured against her hair, still half asleep. 5 more minutes. She smiled, laced her fingers through his. "We'll miss breakfast." "I don't care about breakfast. Your mother will come looking for us." His eyes opened. Reality arrived. Good point. They got ready in a dance of small new intimacies. He brushed his teeth while she fixed her hair. She reached past him for her earrings, and he kissed her shoulder as she leaned in. Small things. First morning things. The kind of gestures that felt like the beginning of a language they'd spent years learning to speak. They rode the elevator down. When the doors opened to the lobby, Noah reached for her hand. Their fingers interlocked, naturally, easily, as if they'd been doing it for years instead of hours. Richard and Catherine were already seated at a table by the window, coffee cups half empty, a basket of pastries between them. Catherine was laughing at something Richard had said, her hand resting on his arm. They looked up as Noah and Ella approached, hand in hand. Catherine's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Richard set down his napkin. For 3 full seconds, neither parent moved. Then Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Her hand flew to her chest and she looked at Richard with an expression that said every scheming, plotting, strategizing moment had been worth it. Richard stood. He looked at his daughter's hand wrapped in Noah's, then at her face, open, glowing, unguarded in a way he hadn't seen since she was a little girl. His chin trembled just once. "Well," he said, his voice thick, "this is the best gift I've ever received." Catherine nodded, wiping her eyes with her napkin. "Both of us. The very best." Ella's eyes stung. She squeezed Noah's hand. He squeezed back. They sat down and had breakfast. The most ordinary, extraordinary breakfast of their lives. Monday morning. Green Memorial Hospital, 7:15 a.m. They walked through the front doors together, hand in hand. Ella had rehearsed this moment in her head. She'd imagined gasps, dropped clipboards, maybe someone fainting. She expected shock, disbelief, the dramatic unraveling of a secret that had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. What she got was Linda, glancing up from the nurse's station, looking at their joined hands and saying, "Finally." No surprise. Not even a raised eyebrow. Marco walked past, saw them, and nodded like someone confirming a weather forecast. "Called it." A radiology tech named Susan paused, smiled, and said, "You two took long enough." In the elevator, a janitor named George looked at their hands, looked at their faces, and shrugged. Everybody knew. By the time they reached the 5th floor, they'd received exactly 0 shocked reactions and approximately 14 variations of "about time." Noah looked at Ella. "This is insulting. We were that obvious?" "Apparently." At lunch, they sat in their usual corner of the cafeteria. Noah reached across, picked up her sandwich and tore the crusts off with the same surgical precision he'd used 100 times before. He set them on his plate and handed the sandwich back. She took it, bit into it, glanced at the counter and saw his coffee arrive, pale, drowning in milk. She caught the barista's eye and shook her head. The cup was taken back and returned correctly. 1 drop of milk. Just a whisper. Exactly the same as always. Except that when the end of lunch came, and they stood in the corridor where their paths split, her toward pediatrics, him toward surgery, the goodbye was different. He didn't lean toward her cheek. She didn't tilt to offer the corner of her mouth. He cupped her face in both hands right there in the middle of the hallway and kissed her. Full, slow, deliberate. The kind of kiss that makes everyone within a 20-foot radius either look away or stop and stare. Linda stared. Marco stared. George, mopping nearby, paused mid-stroke and grinned. When they pulled apart, Ella's cheeks were flushed and Noah's crooked smile was back. But different now. Warmer, settled, like a man who'd finally stopped running from the best thing that had ever happened to him. "See you after rounds," he said. "Don't lose your pen." "Wouldn't dream of it." He walked away. She watched him go. And for the first time, she didn't pretend she wasn't watching. 5 months later, the auditorium at Green Memorial was full. Every seat taken. Residents lined the walls. Nurses crowded the back rows. Even George had found a spot near the door, mop resting against the wall beside him like a loyal companion. Noah stood at the podium, delivering a lecture on advances in minimally invasive cardiac surgery. He was good at this, commanding a room with the same confidence he brought to an operating table. His voice was clear, his slides precise, his occasional humor drawing laughter that rippled across the rows. Ella sat in the 3rd row, between Linda and her father. She watched Noah with the quiet pride of a woman who knew every version of the man at that podium. The arrogant one, the tender one, the one who still stole her pens and left love notes in her lab coat pockets when she wasn't looking. 5 months. 5 months of falling deeper into a love she'd spent 3 years denying. 5 months of learning that the man who drove her crazy was also the man who made her feel safer than anyone ever had. Noah finished his lecture. The applause was warm and genuine. Then he didn't step away from the podium. "Before you go," he said, and something in his voice shifted. The professional tone dissolved. What replaced it was raw and unsteady and unmistakably personal. "There's one more thing." He looked at Ella. "Ella, could you come up here?" She frowned. Looked at Linda, who was suspiciously misty-eyed. Looked at her father, who was smiling so wide his face could barely contain it. "Go on, sweetheart," Richard whispered. She stood, walked to the stage on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The auditorium was silent, 300 people holding their breath. She reached him. He took her hands. And then Noah Williams, proud, stubborn, impossible Noah Williams, sank to one knee. Ella's hands flew to her mouth. The tears came before the words, before the question, before anything. They fell fast and silent, and she didn't try to stop them. "Ella Green," he said. His voice cracked on her name. He steadied it. "From the first day I walked into this hospital, you turned my world completely upside down. You challenged me, you frustrated me, you made me a better man without even trying. And somewhere between all the arguments and the stolen pens and the bread crusts I pretended I didn't care about, I fell in love with you. The kind of love that doesn't fade. The kind I want to wake up to every single morning." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opened it. A ring caught the auditorium lights and threw tiny sparks across the stage. "I want to spend the rest of my life having my days brightened by you. Will you marry me?" She couldn't speak. She nodded, fast, desperate, laughing through her tears, and then the word broke free. "Yes." The auditorium erupted. 300 people on their feet. Applause, cheers, Linda crying openly, Marco whistling through his fingers, George raising his mop in triumph. Noah slid the ring onto her finger, stood and kissed her. She threw her arms around his neck and held on like she'd never let go. In the third row, Richard put his arm around Catherine. She buried her face in his shoulder, tears soaking his shirt. He kissed the top of her head and smiled the smile of a man whose patience had finally, beautifully paid off. A Sunday in October. Golden light through tall windows. The smell of roasted chicken and Catherine's famous apple pie filling every corner of the house. The family sat around the dining table. Richard at the head, Catherine beside him, their hands intertwined on the tablecloth as if proximity was something they'd never take for granted. And Noah at the other end, holding his daughter. She was 6 months old. Dark hair like her mother, green eyes that were already learning to focus on faces with the same intensity Ella brought to everything. She was tiny and warm and perfect, and she had Noah Williams wrapped around every single one of her miniature fingers. He made faces at her. She gurgled. He pretended to eat her toes. She laughed, that hiccuping, open-mouthed baby laugh that could restart a stopped heart. Ella watched them from her chair, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes soft with a love so full it barely fit inside her body. Noah looked at his daughter, then at his wife. "You two," he said, his voice thick and quiet and certain, "are the loves of my life, the sun that lights up every single day." He leaned toward Ella, kissed her slowly, gently, with the tenderness of a man who understood, finally and completely, that everything he'd ever wanted had been standing in front of him the whole time, arguing with him, stealing his pens back, and correcting his coffee. He pulled back, looked at her. His eyes were full. "I'm the luckiest man in the world." Ella smiled. The sharp-tongued, stubborn, brilliant woman who'd spent 3 years pretending she couldn't stand him reached over and wiped a tear from his cheek. "I know," she said. "I've been telling you that for months." He laughed. The baby laughed. Catherine laughed. Richard shook his head and poured more wine. And the kitchen filled with the sound of a family that had found each other, not in spite of the chaos, but because of it. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.